Hey, Adam, next slide. All right, welcome to Ignite. We are super happy to be back here for the 6th straight Ignite at Google I/O. And we've got 8 amazing speakers for today. And now we're going to get started. So Ignite started a decade ago. And it's on the simple premise that everybody has a story, that everybody deserves a chance to be a rock star. But when it first started out, it was really just about giving people a chance to share ideas over beer. We set up in a bar, we invited friends over, and 200 people showed up. Ask Google. And all of the speakers got 5 minutes on stage. 15 seconds a slide, 20 slides. And it turns out that's the perfect amount of time to share one idea, to share one story. And it helps new speakers really distill their thoughts. Over time, Ignite started to spread around the world. It's now in over 300 cities on all 6 continents. And Ignite is changing. So very recently, Tim, our first speaker, allowed me to reacquire Ignite, and we are now Ignite Talks PBC, a public benefit corporation devoted to giving people a chance to experience public speaking for the first time around the world. So thank you very much for having us here. And now I'd like to welcome up my friend, the founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media, Tim O'Reilly.
Hey, thanks, Brady. So I'm working on a new event called the Next Economy Summit about technology and the future of work. And I've been out there talking to smart people like Hal Varian, who said to me something that stuck with me. He said, my grandfather wouldn't recognize what I do as work. But was he kidding? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Here's a bunch of programmers at Pivotal, and then a Victorian sweatshop. But actually, something is really different. Because the programmers are not actually the workers. Low-wage employers like McDonald's and Walmart are the new sweatshop. Something different's happening in tech. McDonald's has 440,000 employees delivering 68 services to 68 million monthly users. Snapchat, 300 to do 100 million users. Why? Because this is what the worker looks like. That's the GitHub repo for one of the workers at Google. TensorFlow does a whole lot of work for millions of users with very few people. The programmers, all of you who are programmers, are actually managers. Every day, you're inspecting the performance of your workers, giving them instruction in the form of code about how to do a better job. That's what the build, measure, learn cycle is. It's your management practices. But there are other companies where the programs are the managers. Think about Uber or Lyft. There are programs telling humans what to do. They're telling them where to show up, how much to get paid, and of course, organizing ratings. But the people who've written the algorithms are not necessarily doing a good job by their human workers, because Uber ends up paying people less than minimum wage in some cities because they've written the algorithm to satisfy only user needs without thinking about the needs of the workers. And this seems to me to be like what happened in the early days of search with companies like Alta Vista, here retrieved from 1996. It was a pretty shitty search experience. And along came Google. And they figured out that by tuning the algorithm, by figuring out lots and lots of different factors, they create a better experience for users. They could also figure out how to get paid with the ad auction. There's a lot of work ahead of us to figure out how to make these algorithms that manage humans work better for the workers as well as for the users. I predicted that this would be the year in which labor issues became really critical, competitive advantage between Uber and Lyft, and sure enough, Uber just made a deal with the mechanics union. Because as my friend David Rolfe of the SEIU, who spoke at last year's Next Economy Summit, said, God did not make being an auto worker a good job. Right? It took a lot of work by a lot of people to figure out how to make work good for humans. And when you look at a company like Walmart, which has really crappy jobs for humans, managed by algorithms, the scheduling algorithms that tell people when to show up have no affordances for workers. When you go to a McDonald's, you might be a assigned what's called a clopen, a shift where you have to close the store and open it the next morning, maybe 5 hours apart. The fact that you live an hour away doesn't matter. You don't do it, you get fired. Right? There's terrible algorithms there. And that's why the algorithms that Uber and Lyft are using actually give people more affordances. They haven't yet figured out how to get people paid enough, but they are giving people control over their lives in a way that the scheduling algorithms that are made the new sweatshop do not. But back to Hal. There are also other kinds of jobs you wouldn't recognize as work. How about all the people who are creating content on social media, on Facebook and YouTube? Some people are starting to make a living at it, but not enough. I lost a slide here. I had one in here, but anyway, we'll just go forward with this. This is what led Jack Conte to start Patreon, which is a crowdfunding site for artists. He was a member of a musical duo, or still is, called Pomplamoose with his wife. They did 17 million views of one of their videos on YouTube, and it turned out to give them $3,500. He said, there's got to be a better way. And so he basically is now raising millions of dollars. Brandon Stanton, Humans of New York. This guy has raised millions of dollars for charity, but he gets his living from doing speaking gigs. Amazing social media genius. So all of this is a way of saying we have to think in the same way that Norman Mailer asked the question, why are we in Vietnam, and gave a talk about American macho. We have to ask ourselves, why are we seeing this political uprising about income inequality? And we have a role in this because it's time to build technology and companies as if people matter. And because we are actually not just serving users, we are building systems of work, we have to think hard about the future of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks again for the support with Ignite. Now we are going straight to the future with robots. Please welcome up the Executive Director of Long Now and the star of BattleBots, Zander Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, so in my spare time, one of the things that I got into over 20 years ago was combat robotics, which got started around here in the Bay Area about 20 years ago. And it started as an event called Robot Wars in Fort Mason. And pretty early on, one of the things that started shaking out were the types of designs of robots that could be allowed. Because there's a lot of rules, mainly a weight limit that you're working up against. But the real thing that started to come about is like, are you building a spinner, a lifter, a flipper, a puncher, something that cuts? And so the robot that we first built back almost 20 years ago was a robot called Rhino where we developed a very powerful pneumatic kind of punching system. And it did pretty well. We were able to get kind of third place. And then there's a TV show that was on Comedy Central back then, and now almost 12 years ago. But when we took that same pneumatic system, instead of trying to leverage off our own robot, to turn that system vertically, we could actually start launching other robots up in the air. And so this is a much more successful robot. We won several championships with this robot named Toro back in that TV show. And then the TV show went off the air, and then just this last year, ABC called up and said they wanted to do the show again. And so we started building from scratch once again. And one of our main things that we started learning about new components, being able to how we're going to design now is with really high performance components that have come out of the automotive industry, the electric bike industry. Now there's actual robot controllers like these ones that have a processor on board so that you can do some of the programming that's actually in the computer as much as, or on board the robot as much as the controls that you're doing. Some things that have really changed are things like batteries, these lithium polymer batteries. The old robots we built had 40 pounds of lead acid batteries or NiCad batteries. Now they have 6 pounds of batteries, and they have even more better performance. And then some components we had to fabricate ourselves. So we actually had to design and build our own gearboxes in order to get the kind of performance to weight ratio in kind of titanium, steel, and aluminum gearboxes. And the other constraint is that you find out that you're building this robot because it's TV 2 months before the TV show. And so we went straight to CAD, working with a bunch of the cool new Autodesk tools. But we had to design in a way that we could, once we had a design, we could fabricate very fast. So we kind of used this flat pack design of notching everything together, went to laser cut wood. We could just hot glue everything together, put all our components inside the robot, see if it works. We probably built 6 or 7 versions in wood before we went to metal. But those exact same cutting files that we used in wood, we could then put into a water jet machine. And what we were cutting in wood, we're now cutting in aluminum, titanium, very high strength steel like AR500 steel. And the main constraint that you're always up against in trying to build a BattleBot is weight. It's a 250-pound weight class right now. And so at every stage, you're trying to trade weight on the inside of the robot for performance in the weapon system or armor. And so once you do make it out of metal, the hot glue of the metal world is MIG welding. You can pretty much, once you now are working in this kind of format of water jet to MIG welding, we were able to build bot chassis in literally 1 day. And then the much slower part comes when you have to cram all the actual robotic stuff in there and make it so that it could perform reasonably. Last year, the robot that we built was a launcher, again, probably 3 times as powerful as any one we'd ever built before, called Bronco. And it has 12,000 pounds of lifting force in a 250-pound robot that can exert that force in a little less than 100th of a second. So it's a very hard robot on itself, in a sense. This is us fighting a robot called Stinger. And this was the quarterfinals of last season. And then in the semifinals, we got taken out by a robot called Tombstone with a spinning weapon. To give you an idea of the kind of forces that are involved here, that's 3/8 aluminum that looks like it's torn like paper, and armor grade 38 tie just getting shredded across this robot. So being able to contain the forces and take those forces is really difficult. We just finished filming season 2. This is the new version of Bronco. It has 6 wheels, and basically wheels get torn off. So we wanted to have a robot that could after some of the wheels got torn off, could still keep running. And the new season starts, I think, Thursday, June 23rd, and you can see the evolution of robot combat as it comes together now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zander. And now we are going to space with the author of a new book in cooperation with NASA. Please welcome up Ariel Waldman.
Hello. So this is an image that's from my favorite spacecraft, Voyager 1. And if you can see that little pale blue speck of a pixel there, that's actually Earth as seen from about 4 billion miles away. So that's where you can find me if you need me. But the reason why I love images like these so much is because it really shows us how space exploration often changes our view of ourselves and our place in the universe. But similarly, I think we should change how we view space exploration. Most of us are just observing astronauts exploring on behalf of us, but we ourselves aren't doing much exploring. And this relates to my own personal story because I was watching a documentary called When We Left Earth about NASA during the early days, and I became so incredibly inspired by this documentary that I decided to send someone at NASA an email saying I was a huge fan of what they were doing, and if they ever needed someone like me, someone completely without a science background, I went to art school, I was here. Serendipitously, I got a job at NASA from that email, and it was a total fangirl moment. And so I wanted to share a quick clip from this documentary about why I found it so inspiring.
We knew nothing about spacecraft. We knew nothing about orbits.
I saw a lot of rockets launched. I'd say that somewhere between 30 and 40% of them failed.
That's what I love so much about this documentary, because as they were saying, they didn't know anything about spacecrafts or rockets. They were figuring it out. And I said to myself, I don't know anything about spacecrafts or rockets. I want to work at NASA. That sounds amazing. So I got that chance, and it completely changed my life. And I got to learn about all sorts of things, dark matter and robots, and what our galaxy really looks like. It looks like something like this, actually. And one of the coolest things I got to learn about were black holes. And black holes are really interesting because they're these incredibly uncharted territories of space. They're something that has been science fiction for a long time, but now they're actually science. And they're just fascinating, but they also get a bit of a bad rep. But people put all of their wonders and hopes and dreams into black holes. They wonder all sorts of things about, what if we live inside of a black hole, or what are white holes, or they wonder, what if we were to fall through a black hole? Would we actually have to spend time with Matthew McConaughey? I really, really hope not. But black holes are incredibly evil. They're seen as evil things because they're known for gobbling up planets and stars and maybe even entire galaxies. And do they ever stop? Do they ever get tired of eating things? Well, it turns out they sometimes do get tired of eating things. When they bite off more than they can chew, they actually vomit it back out into the universe violently in the form of mixed up space dust and space gas and space energy. And that mixed up stuff can actually go on to create future stars, future planets. So in a sense, they're kind of the creators of the universe. And we can't image a black hole, but we can image a black hole's vomit, which you can see right here. And imaging black hole vomit is really great because it allows us to find new black holes. And there's actually a project called Galaxy Zoo Radio on spacehack.org, which is a directory of ways to participate in space exploration that I had created. And you can actually find black holes by combing through their vomit. This is something that should be science fiction, anyone being able to discover black holes, but it's actually science. And turning science fiction into science is at the heart of NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts. It's a program that I help advise at NASA that funds the more sci-fi, futuristic, out there, weird stuff that could transform future space missions. So the types of stuff that they fund are things like the Comet Hitchhiker. And the Comet Hitchhiker is literally a project where a probe can go to a comet, tether into it, and harvest its kinetic energy to explore the solar system twice as fast as any of our current probes. There's also projects like the Solar Lunar Rovers, which essentially uses computer vision to route better routes on the moon for rovers so that they can stay in continuous sunlight and actually perform better science and they don't have to turn off overnight. There's also projects like the Titan submarine, which is literally a concept to build a submarine, send it to a moon of Saturn, and have it explore the lakes of methane and ethane there and do a bunch of cool stuff while it's there. Having a submarine on a moon around Saturn is amazing to me. And then there's projects that are actually about using technology from MIT Media Lab that can actually see behind corners and strapping it to a space probe and allowing it to actually be able to see inside lunar caves, which is really, really cool. So the coolest thing about NIAC is the fact that they accept proposals from anyone. Anyone can apply every year and actually submit a proposal, get it funded by NASA, and actually perform science fiction. So to me, when it comes to space exploration and black holes and all of this stuff, the thing that's really cool is about spitting out, vomiting out awesome stuff into the universe to go on to transform the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. And her book is entitled, What's It Like in Space? It's pretty awesome. And now to learn about users, please welcome up UX researcher, Elizabeth Churchill.
Hi, so I've been studying human-computer interaction for a long time, and more recently I'm turning my eye to human data interaction. And when I say data, I mean all of the data about you as a consumer that is collected from devices and services, or the data that you're collecting as developers from people. And if you take one thing away from this talk, I want you to just ask yourselves, why? Why is the data being collected? Why are you collecting the data? For what purpose? Because I think one of the things we need as data scientists is to be clear about the data we're collecting. Now, I've worked with data scientists and designers to build recommendation algorithms for merchandising, quite positive. I'm now working with privacy and safety experts to worry about some of the concerns people have. And the piece down the middle is visibility. And so even in corporations, we don't always have visibility into the reasons why we collect data, and consumers certainly don't, and that causes anxiety. And when you talk to people about data collection, they often think about surveillance. Now, surveillance evokes the idea of the collection of data for a particular purpose. And as we move into this new world, though, of the Internet of Things and smart cities and smart homes, a lot of sensor data is being collected with no particular purpose in mind. Back to the question, why? Because we can, just because we can, because it might be useful perhaps, because we haven't thought about not doing it. Now, data science is in its infancy, and it's a fetish object, it's a fetish topic. Everyone loves data science. But we're at the beginning of understanding what we should collect and what we're not collecting, as well as what we are collecting. So it's not surprising that as consumers and those concerned about data, surveillance, or the watched watching the watchers, is becoming increasingly something we're interested in. We're asking questions about why. Now, I've done a series of interviews with people about their concerns about data, and it isn't black or white, unlike my slides. It's about wanting a contract and a conversation. It's about wanting to participate, wanting visibility. Now, a friend of mine, when she found out she was pregnant, decided that she did not want to be tracked about her pregnancy. So she used incognito mode for searches. She bought nothing online. She didn't talk on social media about her pregnancy. She took efforts to opt out, including paying for large objects like prams with cash and gift cards rather than credit cards. Now, nothing wrong with that, but what was wrong with the model in the data model? It flagged her as a potential criminal. It flagged her as fraudulent, potentially, so she had to unravel that. Data science is in its infancy, and our predictive models about what people's intent or actions are not always right. So what we're doing, if we're not careful, is creating a climate of lack of trust. And what that means is people may potentially walk away from our services and devices because we're not including them and thinking hard about this. And so, again, ask why you're collecting data, ask what models you're building, ask what data you're not collecting in order to build a better model, a more rounded model, and think about why not participation. Now, I mentioned to my friend, and one of the big issues I think we need to think about is meaningful opt-in and opt-out. What does it mean to let people choose to opt out of data collection? In the EU, this is becoming increasingly a big issue, and a regulation is about to pass. Also about deletion, the right to be forgotten. Data science is in its infancy. We don't yet understand how the statistical models we buy will cope with the removal of data. So deletion is a really interesting technical problem. I've mentioned forecasting. Intent modeling and forecast modeling is clearly beneficial in many, many, many instances, but we have to not just take them, the forecasts as given, we have to ask why and what, and we have to come with the primary premise as building trust and collaboration with people on whose data we're collecting. We should start with models of trust first, and then think about where we're going forward. So I just want to sum up the things I've been thinking about. Asking why, meaningful opt-in, opt-out. What does it mean to delete? What are the forecast models of the future, and how can we forecast what data we're collecting that's artifactual? How will it be used? And build on trust. So I want to think about you talking to me about human data interaction from your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now we're going to find out what happens when a nerd decides to learn about sports. Please welcome up Toby Segaran.
Hi, I'm Toby. I really, really like gambling. And fantasy sports is actually one of the only legal forms of gambling that you can do online in the US. And this is my story of the 2016 NFL season. I started noticing these articles just appearing, on feeds and stuff like that, about how these sites were ripping off sports fans because there were too many sharks. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm a shark. And this involves two things I know a lot about: gambling and algorithms, and one thing I know nothing about, which was sports. But I figured 2 out of 3 isn't bad, and maybe I should give this a shot. So I'm talking through how fantasy football works. You can see you come to these sites, and there are lots of competitions. There are different buy-ins, different prizes you can get. And then you can click through to one of the actual contests and see that, just come up a second. You can see that this is, there are different payouts. Most notably is that 500 people can enter, but only 100 people win here. And some of the top prizes are actually quite high. You're only paying $27 and you could win over $1,000. And to actually set up the teams, you buy a bunch of real-life players, and you have a budget, so you can't just pick all the best ones, and you get points based on how well they play in the Sunday games. So that's how this is how you set up the teams. And this is everything I knew about football before I started. Matt Saracen and Moxon, they were the main guy, the ones they make the movies about. So there's a quarterback. And it turns out there are other players too. This is Antonio Brown, he's a wide receiver. This is the guy the quarterback throws to, and this will become important later. They can get you a lot of fantasy points as well. It also turns out there's an entire other team called the defense. And the defense plays when the quarterback's playing on the other team. So the quarterbacks never even play each other, which is, I guess, why the movies are always plotted around one quarterback and not so much a rivalry. Okay, so here's why this is difficult. When you construct a team, there are all these different choices, and basically there are 3 quadrillion possible teams once you figure out all the combinations of players you could put in. So that's far too many for a human to consider, and even far too many for a machine to consider. The strategy also is that you have to basically play really risky teams, because being just slightly above average doesn't get you any prizes in these tournament contests. They have different ones, but that's less fun, and I figured this would be the way to play. So what I figured out was I needed to enter many teams per week, figuring out the best players, what the scores were likely to be, and construct a team out of those, and then actually construct a portfolio of teams that have a chance of being right near the top. So I did a bunch of modeling, but it turns out that if you just average the projected scores that the sports sites give you, those are actually a fairly good proxy for how well the players are going to do. But what's interesting is that even though this might be the average score that they get, the distributions of the scores are quite different. The quarterback is much more consistent than the wide receiver. So in order to have these high variance teams, these really risky teams, you want to think about the distributions that you're playing with. The other thing is that the players' scores correlate with each other. Because the quarterback passes to the wide receiver, they actually have a high correlations between their scores. Essentially, if the quarterback does well, the wide receiver tends to do well. So having 2 on the same team, these 2 players from the same real-life team helps increase your variance. So the idea would be to create a set of teams with really high variance, who are going to score really well or really poorly, and that have low correlation with each other. And of course, you still want them to score well. And so the way I did this was I created a set of teams at random, and then sort of predict the outcomes of this portfolio based on probabilities of what they'll score given their distributions, given their correlations with each other. So you can see here that I can calculate the probability that one of my teams will score above 140, the probability that one will score above 160. 160 was a good sort of metric for being in that top green spot, and the correlations between them. And then we optimize by changing out the players, and maybe you can increase the expected values and the variance of each team while also decreasing the correlation. We just keep doing this randomly, and we can see the probabilities getting higher and higher. So here are my final results. For the 2015 season, expectation is negative 10% because they take a cut. My return was 296%. But only 8 of my teams actually won. Yeah.
So how many people here have read Programming Collective Intelligence? Really? Nobody? Best-selling data science book? Anyway, that's what happens when the author decides to learn how to play football. Now we have a double E star. Please welcome up Star Simpson.
So I got into electronics almost completely by accident. And thank you, Brady. My name is Star Simpson, and I'm a hardware designer. I I got into electronics when I was 14 years old because I found this book. And I found this book in this old computer lab at my high school that had been abandoned. It was locked most of the time. For some reason, I was in it, and I found a book, and it was so important to me, I knew I needed to have it. So I promised I was going to take it home for the summer without asking. I took it home, and I looked at all the parts I needed to build every project in it. I went to my mom, and I was like, Mom, I need all these electronics, and it was a lot of money. But she did it, and she ended up getting me all the parts. I spent the whole summer building every project in it, and I realize now she got a bargain, honestly, entertaining me for 3 whole months. And I went and I finished every project in that book, cover to cover. I left no project unbuilt, one after another. It was amazing. I learned so much. I built all of these things. I built a circuit that had a game where you touch it and it would, you won or lost. I built something that let you count numbers on a little digital display. I mean, I thought it was really cool. I built something that remembered what state it should be in, and I felt like I gained this superpower. It was awesome. That's me gaining a superpower. I had shorter hair then. The thing that I thought was so cool about it was that, you learn to connect things that are, math to how it's described to how it exists in the physical world. And the thing that's great to me especially is I'm not the only one to have had that experience. Millions of people have actually used the same book to learn. And I know engineers today who still think in terms of the pictures that were in the book. I ended up going back to school. At my high school, I joined the robotics team. I ended up becoming president of it. I got into MIT. I ended up studying electrical engineering, getting a job as an electrical engineer, and I think it's amazing what a little nudge can do. But I think, today's world is different than the one I learned in. So this is all of the Radio Shacks that have now closed. It's basically a map of the United States. Fortunately, we have the internet. That's fantastic, right? But I think there's something to the physical experience of building electronics that's different. It's tangible. When you poke at something and you can debug it and you can see, where your mistake is, that's so, so important, so tangible. So I found that book again. It's called Getting Started in Electronics. And, the whole thing is drawn by hand. The idea is that you found someone's notebook, and it just happens to be about learning electronics. I forgot about it for years, and I just found it again. I put it back, by the way, at the end of the summer. And it talks you through how to understand electronics as a language. So let me talk a little bit about how that works. Electronics are described in terms of these pictures. So this is sort of like the floor plan of a circuit. So each of those is a meaningful symbol. It's part of it. And so once you have that floor plan, you can understand how it works, and you can figure out how to build the physical thing from it. So in that sense, to me, it's a lot like learning how to read, and learning how the physical arrangement of things is meaningful. So once you can understand a schematic, which the book works you through, you can go on to build the physical hardware based on it, or you can even go in reverse. And this was a major insight for me, was learning you could look at a piece of hardware and work out how it goes together. In fact, this is a picture, to me, of an insight that took a lot of time to build up. This was a thing you could do, is you could hold a piece of hardware up to a light, and you could see how everything was connected. And if you're really patient, you can write down all of the connections and understand how it works. But so, schematics are usually these symbols. They're usually the same sort of components. You see them everywhere. And, once you can figure out how they all go together, you can decide what you want them to do. And I started thinking about how to make a piece of hardware that included all of those insights. So you can see here, instead of holding it up to a light, I've designed the circuit board that shows how everything's connected. It has the schematic. It includes the language that describes itself. This is the backside of the same board. You can see a description telling you how it's supposed to work and what it's supposed to do, because I want everyone to be able to have the experience that I did when I was first learning electronics. To fill the gap left behind by Radio Shack. They're called Circuit Classics. Thank you.
And as it happens, you can back her on Kickstarter right now. But Google asked for at least one practical talk, so we're gonna So we're going to learn how various haircuts apply to product design. Please welcome up Nadav.
So whenever you design a new product, especially if it's disruptive, you're going to run into a lot of limitations. Technology problems, bugs, delays, missing data or missing users. Now, the more value you have, the more problems your users will let you get away with. The issue is that if you have design problems in their experience, they'll abandon you before they figure out your value. So that's where the mullet comes in. For those of you who haven't been around in the 80s or certain parts of the US today, a mullet is a haircut that offers business up front and a party in the back. The mullet approach to product design offers you delighting the users up front while keeping all of your limitations in the back. We'll talk about a few examples and ways to try to approach this. So one of the most basic things you start with is use what you have. For those of you who remember MacGyver, and basically, a very common set of problems are related to delays and network connectivity issues. So by anticipating them and being proactive, you can actually cache and preload things so that when your users get to that point, they see an instantaneous content and feel like it's very fast. That's one of the basic things. Instagram is great at these kinds of tricks, and another trick they have is an optimistic UI, where when the user presses an action, the UI tells them it's also already successful, even before they synced it to the server, being optimistic about it. Another totally different way to look at your limitations is to just treat them as part of your product requirements. I was working a few years ago on a fitness experience when people didn't have data plans yet. So we actually designed an experience that showed them the UI every 3 days and assumed that within 3 days they'll connect to Wi-Fi and we'll upload stuff in the background. We also were trying to do accurate activity recognition, which didn't work well with those phones of those days with lots of bugs, battery issues. It was hard to get the users to hold the phone in the right way for us to accurately get it. So what we ended up doing is a high-level score of your activity level that was very easy to score, very easy to collect, and not killing the battery, and the users could have the phone anywhere, even in their backpack. We could still tell if you're walking more than taking the elevator or things like this, which was great for our experience. Still with fitness, another type of limitation can actually come from the outside world and the environment where your product lives, like winter. So winter offers you limitations in weather, shorter days, and lots of heavy family meals. So when you go out running after that heavy family meal in January, you're going to be very far away from your record in the summer, which will be demotivating. Strava caught on to the fact that the Gregorian calendar is really nicely aligned with that dip in fitness. So by resetting your personal annual score, your first run is already a record, and your second run is a better improvement on that record. So they're using the limitations and the solutions from the environment. Have you ever thought about why Google Cardboard doesn't have a headband? So Cardboard tries to run on as many phones as possible with lots of processing power and graphics abilities. You should also know that with VR, if things are jittery, people get motion sickness. By not having a strap, they're forcing the user to hold it with both hands and move slower in the speed of their torso or their shoulders, which is much slower than the speed of your head moving. So by using one limitation, you solve a worse one. Form informs the function. Now, a totally different approach is to get your users to help. If you design your experience carefully enough, you can have your users do your chores and enjoy them and solve all your limitations as you progress. A common problem is getting to critical mass. And a common solution is finding value for a single user, like Delicious did, where users started by going into saving their own bookmarks to Delicious, and over time, the value grew and the network effect kicked in. So like hair, your product grows with time. Remember this. You can take this approach and even do a totally different experience for early adopters. Waze had a data problem, a data limitation, where they didn't have enough roads in the beginning. So they had a whole experience around a game-like experience where their first users were driving through roads like a Pac-Man and eating up power-ups on new roads, which motivated them to help map the system. Once that was done, they throw away that experience. You can even take that solution and productize it. Luis van Aan has been great about taking these very hard problems and making fun user experiences. While they learn a new language or play a game, they're actually solving hard problems like translating the internet or tagging photos and images. As you see, the mullet is a very powerful tool, and we have to treat it respectfully. We have to remember that our goal is to delight users, not to scam them, and not to make ourselves look better, right? And some companies tend to forget that. A few examples, Ashley Madison had a female number problem, and so they used bots and fake accounts to try to solve that. Volkswagen had a technology problem, and their workaround was to find a detector for being tested, and they're still screwing their users. So don't screw your users. Some other takeaways are that you really have to understand your limitations. You have to understand your users and your motivation, and you have to understand the milieu, the environment in which your product lives in order to design the best product experience, which is not necessarily always the best engineering experience. Now, as you see, this is a very powerful tool. It can be applied to other domains as well, like giving talks. When you need to give a talk about a topic you have no idea about, pick the right experience that you'll still get applause at the end, like 20 slides, 5 minutes, and no audio questions at the end. Thank you very much.
I never thought it would be awesome to be compared to a mullet. Thank you, Nadav. And now our final talk is just going to give you some food for thought for when you do design those applications. Please welcome up Renee DiResta.
So, conspiracy theorists think that the Brazilian government, the CDC, and the World Health Organization are lying to us about the Zika virus. But they're not sure whether to blame vaccines, GMOs, chemtrails, or Monsanto. And residents in Portland, Oregon, a few years back, voted to eliminate fluoride from their water supply. And depending on which side you asked, it was either a toxic chemical that caused cancer or a toxic mind control substance used by fascist regimes, and also dentists. And then there was the time last year when the federal government invaded Texas. Now, that actually never happened, but local residents were so convinced that routine military practice exercise Jade Helm was an Obama attempt to impose martial law that the governor of the state said that he would have the State National Guard monitor the exercise. So, we laugh at this stuff, and we say, these conspiracy theorists, they're so unlike the rest of us. But this is actually happening with increasing frequency, and so we need to understand why. Because the thing that these stories have in common is that all of these myths and conspiracies propagated on social networks. Algorithms are influencing policy, and not necessarily for the better. I'm sure everyone in here has heard of the filter bubble. It's the idea that platforms they want to show you what you want to see because it keeps you engaged and targetable for longer. And the filter bubble was about partisan politics, but what we're seeing now is recommendation engines, and it's a little bit more like radicalization. Because once you join one conspiracy theory group on Facebook, anti-vax, for example, it starts to serve you content not only about that conspiracy, but about related conspiracies. You probably want to know about chemtrails, about GMOs, about how the Earth is flat. And yes, that's real. And once you join those groups, people will tell you, they will welcome you, and they'll reinforce your beliefs, and they'll congratulate you on being awake. And the experience is very much like being recruited into a cult, because social networking has disrupted the market for cult leaders. And the reason this matters is that we're at a point where over 50% of adults say that they get their news primarily from social channels, like Facebook. And it matters what you see, because if you see things from people you know or people in your groups, you're more likely to trust it. And the other kind of corollary here is that social networking also made us all content creators, but it really deprecated the editorial function. So now we have a point where anyone can write anything anywhere, and as long as they can achieve enough uptake, it's likely to rise in search rankings on social networks. So we've reached a point where things that are popular and emotionally resonant are much more likely to be seen by you than things that are true. Facts really just don't matter. So the power to influence our opinions, the power to shape beliefs, increasingly lies with those who most effectively disseminate their message, whether that message is true or not. And what happens online and what happens offline are not, there's no difference there, there's no gap there. This is, in some ways fantastic, right? Social networks are a great tool for organizing. But the problem that we have is that in conspiracy theory land, there's an asymmetry of passion. It's actually a very small number of people, but they're producing far more content than what you would see from the people who aren't really prone to those beliefs. And we saw this play out in an interesting way in California last year during the heated debate about the vaccine law, which was that the conspiracy that vaccines cause autism eventually led us to a measles outbreak because school vaccination rates were so low. And so legislators stepped up and tried to remedy the problem legislatively. And all of a sudden, the asymmetry of passion was in full view because the vast majority of content across all social channels, Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, was anti-vax. But when legislators actually reached out and started polling their constituents and reaching out to people directly, they found that over 67% were in favor of the law, and over 85% were, believed that vaccines were safe and didn't buy into the conspiracy theory nonsense. But those people aren't getting up in the morning to tweet about this, right? People aren't getting up in the morning to tweet about the Earth being round. And so we've reached the point where the kind of legislative interactions spawned by conspiracy theory groups waste time and they waste money. And so now it's up to us in tech, which is why I'm giving this talk here, to start thinking about the ethics of platform design and how our recommendation engines and sort of the unintentional side effects are actually shaping the future. So Facebook has been in the news about this a lot over the last week, and they are using humans in addition to algorithms to kind of amplify certain editorial stories. They are starting to note things that are hoaxes on the platform. And here we are at Google, and Google was talking about maybe having a truth ranking. But I'm going to close with a paraphrase from the filter bubble. We need these algorithms to have a sense of civic responsibility in order for the web to be that thing that we've all dreamed of it being. Thank you.
Yep, that's right. All right, thank you very much. We'll be back next year, and the videos will be up shortly.